Rama lama lama kadingity ding dong shoo wop shoo wada wada yippity boom de boom chang 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 de chang shabop dip the dip doo wop the dooby doo boogity 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 shooby doo wop shoo wop nana 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 yippity dip the boom.
A wop bob a loo bop, a wop bamboo.
Wait, what? I don't understand. Okay, welcome back to NostalgiaCast. I'm Jonny.
And I'm Darin.
And Darin, today's episode is Grease, 1978, directed by Randal Kleiser, starring John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John, or Olivia Newton-John Travolta, which I like to refer to him as.
Easier.
We've also got Stockard Channing in there, Jeff Conway, Sid Caesar shows up in there. Anybody else you want to mention?
Didi Khan, I think she showed up in all three versions of Grease. So this one, the sequel, and I think the live version.
All right. Well, I'm excited for this episode because Grease, like I mentioned when I announced we were doing this one, this is something we always talk about, and I thought, why not? Let's do it. Let's watch the movie finally. However, I have seen it like dozens of times.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure how many times I've seen it, but I can't remember when the first time was that I saw it. I know I was real young, because a lot of things that we're talking about went right over my head. I had no idea the things they were saying. But I remember just the music and the dancing and how much fun it was.
Mm-hmm.
But as I got a little older and we would watch it, I remember not liking it that much. I was kind of like, we got to watch Grease again, or you're watching Grease again. It was always that kind of reaction, like,
Yeah.
come on. We've seen that a million times already. And so it was always kind of annoying that we were watching it all the time. But then in college, I got cast in the play. And I think it was actually, I got cast as like a greaser or something. And then the guy who got cast as Vince Fontaine quit or something.
Okay.
So they kind of just gave it to me. I didn't really get like, yeah. So I was like, okay, I'm Vince Fontaine now. And so, but the thing was, with being in the play, I was still in all the other dance sequences and all the, the greaser stuff and the, whatever, all the high school stuff. And then I was also Vince Fontaine. So I was basically on stage the entire show. And so it was a lot of fun. So I got to be a part of every number. And I got to sing a lot of the songs. And it was just it was a blast. And after being in the play and having so much fun doing that, going back and watching it, it was just like, wow, this movie, it's so fun.
Yeah.
Even though some of the characters are cartoony, which I think is on purpose, and it helps, I think, the story and the overall, feel of the movie. But I think, man, it's just a blast to watch. You can tell how much fun they are having, and it's just so much fun. Well, for me to kind of like relive what it was like being in the play and being on stage performing it while I'm watching it. And so it was a blast. I mean, I love, like I said, I love the numbers, I love the music, and just watching them dance, and it was a blast. But anyway, I think I watched it 3 times because I had so much fun watching it. I watched it once, then I showed it to my kids, then I watched it again because like, I kind of want to see it again. I want to see why I liked it so much, because I liked it a whole lot more this time around than I thought I would. I thought I'd be like, okay, yeah, let's watch it again and can I get it over with? But instead, I was just really enjoying every moment of it. And we'll talk about this a little later, I think. But there's some scenes where, like when I was younger, I hated a couple scenes, and we'll talk about them. But I didn't mind them this time. And I was kind of like, it's pretty good. It's a pretty good scene.
Yeah.
But anyway, so tell me your history and what you think about it.
Well, the first thing I want to say is, that's maturity, right? I mean, loving Grease is basically getting over yourself, because I think musicals, it's not cool, I guess, for guys to talk about musicals. It's not the cool, tough guy thing to do. But since you and I are play people, it's kind of in our bones, so to speak. But yeah. So basically breaking down those defenses and finally being able to enjoy this, because this is a movie that I don't want to say it wears you down, but it does get to you. You know what I mean? And so we'll talk about that. But my history, just like you, I don't remember the first time I watched the movie in particular. It's just been always a part of my life. I talk all the time about my mom letting me watch things and find things for myself. And so I think it was just a movie that I ended up watching. The thing that I do remember being addicted to, it's kind of two parts. The first part is I remember getting addicted to the soundtrack. The
Okay.
music is just, it's so catchy and it's so fun. When you're a kid, you don't realize how perverted it is, which is something we want to talk about, and how horny this movie is. You're
Mhm.
just caught up in the like the melodies and how fast and fun everything is. So my memory, and I'm kind of confessing something, is that I think when I was a kid, my mom bought me the LP as a soundtrack for Christmas. And so she kept it in her closet, hidden. She'd bought it a while before, and it was wrapped. And for some reason, I found it in her closet. And being a kid, I opened it up because I really wanted the Grease soundtrack. And yeah, it was the Grease soundtrack. And when she wasn't home because she was working a lot, I would just play it on our record player and just love it. And then when I was done, I would put it back in the closet, make sure that I didn't even retape it. I just took the same tape and just made sure I was very careful to open it up and make sure that I could tape it back. So by the end, I must have listened to it before Christmas once I found it, maybe a dozen times. So my mom's not dumb. She had to know that I had taken it and unwrapped it. And I was just nervous for Christmas morning because I didn't want her to take it away from me because I'd gotten to it early. So that's my main obsession with Grease, was that soundtrack and that LP. And then the second part of the story is, again, you talk about the play. You and I were in a play that we've talked about before called Time and Time Again, which is where we became friends, right? It's how we met.
Mhm.
Time Again, like we talked about, it's a Back to the Future / Grease riff. And I think we mentioned it during the Back to the Future episode, which is funny because that's another 70s 80s movie that takes a look back at the 50s, kind of a nostalgic look back. But
Yeah.
Time and Time Again was basically Back to the Future, just in grease garb, because it was a musical, right? So they had greasers. I think you were a greaser. I was the George McFly character, like kind of the poet
Mhm.
beatnik kind of thing. So that's, watching Grease, watching Back to the Future while we were prepping for Time and Time Again. That's again how I got refreshed with the movie. And like you, I've seen this maybe not a dozen, but maybe dozens of times. And I think I called you early today because this is kind of an impromptu recording. I thought we were going to record tomorrow night, but you have to work. And so I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to watch the movie, but I think that's okay, because like we talked about in Terminator 2, that episode, I'd seen this movie enough that I think I've got it memorized. I don't have to talk about, I don't
Yeah.
have to watch it again, but I did find the time, and, my wife was resting. And so I just decided to put it on. We watched it all the way through. And I'm glad that I did. It's one of those movies that you don't think you're going to pick up on a lot of stuff because you've seen it so many times. But just like you mentioned, I think when you grow older, you start noticing, or you start appreciating things a little bit more. And so there were a couple moments that I just, again, this is one of those movies that it's hard. I know we have to break down defenses, because when we grow up, we love something as a kid, and then as teenagers we kind of rebel. We kind of want to be cool, and so we like do the
Mhm.
things that aren't cool as kids. And then as adults we settle back in. So I watched the movie just kind of amused by how aware of what they were doing, you know what I mean? And so it was a lot of fun that way. But basically, Greece has just been a part of my life. Like, it's been a part of a lot of people's lives, and I just think it's really funny just looking at it through the kind of the POV of how horny of a movie this is, that you don't
Right.
realize it when you're growing up.
Hey, and just full disclosure, there's been a couple episodes where I didn't watch the movie.
Okay. Well,
So,
don't tell anybody what they are, and then we'll just
yeah, well,
people can go back through a backlog and figure it out by how blasé you are about it.
yeah. And also, just for the record too, we did censor some of the language and some of the horniness in the play.
Okay.
So we kind of taped it down for our audience because
Right.
we had to.
Okay.
But anyway, let's talk about Randall Kleiser real quick. He's not a really well-known director, I would say, but because I didn't recognize his name, but I do recognize some of the movies he's directed, like White Fang, and he did Flight of the Navigator.
Mhm.
Is there anything else that you can think of?
He did the Blue Lagoon, which is very controversial for how they tried to promote an underage Brooke Shields being naked throughout most of the movie. So that's where, unfortunately, that's kind of a controversy that he had. But I guess it did make a, sorry, pun not intended, a splash at the box office.
Hmm. Okay, so I mean, like you say, he directed Grease. That's probably one of his biggest, what he's most well known for.
Hmm.
And when you have something like that under your belt, that's
Yeah.
what else do you need?
Yep.
Um, so I want to talk about the play a little bit more. It was directed by James Arrington, and we talked about James in our Swan Princess episode because he did
Yep.
a voice in that movie.
Yep.
And when I first met him, he talked about the Swan Princess, and he was saying like how he had this career in Hollywood, but he gave it up to come teach, and then he ended up directing Grease and a couple other plays that I was in. and he taught me some of my acting classes and a screenwriting class and that kind of stuff. So he's been a big part of my life, or he was when I was in college,
Hmm.
and we got to know each other pretty well. And he was a really talented guy, like really good actor, really good director. I
Okay.
thought he's a good writer. He did a bunch of one man plays, a one man show called forget what it was called. I always forget what it's called. The Farley Family Reunion, I think it's called,
Oh,
where he plays
okay.
every character.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he's kind of well known in the industry, around, in the acting circle, especially you know, in Utah.
Yeah.
But so he's kind of a name. But he directed Grease, and I remember when I auditioned for it, this is probably some, arrogance on my part, but I thought for sure I was kind of going to be a shoe-in for Kaneki. I thought, well, I'll be Kaneki. They'll cast me as Kaneki, no problem. Because I was taller, I thought I had the blonder hair. I wasn't going to be a Zuko, but I could be a Kaneki.
You
And
definitely
that's
have a Kaneki energy. Yeah.
and that's the part I wanted. And so I was like, when I talked to him after I auditioned, he said, "Yeah, well, we like your voice, we like your look." And I was going to be leaving somewhere, like on a vacation or something. So I said, "Well, I won't be here for callbacks." And so he was like, "Oh, well, that was a problem. I had to be there." And so I was like, "Well, okay." So, well, if you could just kind of put me in the background, I'll take it. He's okay. So he cast me as whatever role. And like I said, Vince Fontaine dropped out or something, and so they gave me Vince.
Hmm.
And so one of my good friends actually was Kaneki. We weren't friends then, but we became friends, and he ended up being in two of my student films.
Yeah.
I think you've met him, by the way. But
Probably.
yeah, good actor, good guy. But anyway, the play. I mean, James had this kind of different vision for the play. He had an idea where the actors on stage would be like lockers, and they'd be inanimate
Oh,
objects like trees and
yeah.
lampposts and stuff like that. And so you would have a sign around your neck that said locker, or or tree, or whatever, or and people would interact with you. Like the other actors on stage would like open you up like you're a locker and then slam you shut, and you'd say slam or whatever.
Huh.
And it was just kind of fun. Kind of different vision for the play.
Hmm.
And but anyway, what was my point? Just how much fun it was. Like
Yeah.
I remember we did so much swing dancing, and there's so much, tossing people around, and the choreography that we did. It was so elaborate, and it's so just it was a pretty advanced stuff that we were doing. At least I thought it was, because I'm not the best dancer in the world, but I had to learn these really complex dance moves and sing while you're doing this stuff. And I think people don't realize how much effort and how much talent that takes to do something like that until you're trying to do it yourself. And you're like,
Yeah.
oh crap, this is hard to do. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So when you're trying to move your feet in time with something, and also move your hands a certain way, and then sing at the same time and sing harmony, you know what I mean? It's just different. And it's like, so that's why I'm so impressed by like musical theater, and what people who on the stage can do when these triple or double or triple threats, whatever you want to call them. But James did a good job. He directed a good show, and we got a pretty couple good reviews, in the papers and in the media. So it was well received, and like I said, man, it was so much fun. And I think that's why I always talk about it, because I had a blast, and I met a lot of my current friends from that show. We had Tim. Hey, he came on our show and we talked about Fight Club. He
Yeah.
was Duty in the stage play Agrees with me,
Huh.
and that's where I first met Tim. But yeah. So anyway, you know how much fun it is. I just
Yeah.
wanted to talk about it for a minute there. So thanks for indulging me.
No, it's always good to talk about plays and again, nostalgia, right? That's the whole
Yeah.
point of the show. So it's interesting too that we just barely covered, I was just thinking about, we just barely covered American Graffiti, which kind of has the same kind of vibe, except it's more of a, I guess it's a musical, but it's more background stuff. Like nobody ever sings, but there's constantly music, like we talked
Yeah. Yeah.
about. And where that was a movie made in the 70s that was nostalgic for the 60s. This is a movie that was made in the 70s that's nostalgic for the 50s.
Right.
So some different movies, obviously, but it had this. I just thought it was interesting watching it today. How we already covered American Graffiti, but they're very different movies, even though they have similar vibes, right? Wolfman Jack could be, or Vince Fontaine could be a stand-in for Wolfman Jack, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. So
That's
it's just
basically what it
interesting.
was. Yeah. That's the character he played. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, so let's talk about the actors, because I think this is a big part of the show, and
Mm,
I want to make sure we get in there. So, John Travolta first. Let's talk about John Travolta. Okay, so when I was younger, I remember thinking that some of his performances were a little over the top, and I was
okay.
kind of I always kind of went like I'd cringe a little bit when I see these moments. And one of those moments is at the jukebox with Sandy,
Mhm.
when he says he's trying to, apologize to her and everything. And she's kind of like playing hard to get. And then when she walks away and goes back to uh Chisholm,
Yeah. Hmm.
he's like,
Lorenzo
oh,
Lamas himself, right?
yeah, right, yeah. I was like, holy crap, that's him.
Yeah.
But anyway, when he goes ho and he goes ha ha ha, I remember like cringing at that and
Uh,
hating watching him do that. But this time around, it was like, okay, you know what I mean? Like that was, even though I might think it's still kind of bad. It's like I liked it. I kind of was like willing to accept this bad performance in that moment because everything else that I saw him do was really good. Like, yes, sometimes it's over the top and it's a little silly and cheesy, but there's some moments. And one moment I want to point out is at the bonfire when Kaneki rolls up in the car and he's like, "Oh, what a hunk of junk," and then you see him kind of pause and he looks down at the car and you see him thinking, man, I wish I had one of these. You know what I mean? Like
hmm.
you just see his thought process, and he's like, in that moment, he's jealous that Kaneki has this car. You know what I mean? Even though he thinks it's a hunk of junk, or he's trying to act like he, you know, is trying to tease him about it, he still is like envious that he doesn't have one. Or do you know what I mean? And you see
Yeah.
that thought process, and I was
Yep.
like, wow, I never noticed that before. Even though I've seen it a dozen times, I'd never noticed that look and that thought process. And there's another moment where they're outside the malt shop and he's like, "What, you thinking about that girl again?" He's like, "What are you kidding?" But before he says, "What are you kidding?" he you really see him thinking about Sandy. And you're like, there's just these moments where he
Yep.
does that, and you're like, wow, it's just he's really good, really good.
Yeah, his that moment at the jukebox definitely has a Vinnie Barbarino kind of energy to it,
Yeah,
and maybe that's what he was doing, or maybe that was just shtick at the time. But audiences probably would have gotten a kick out of that because I think he was still contracted to show up in that show, so people would have, even though Saturday Night Fever made him a star, and eventually he moved on to just make movies exclusively. I think people knew him from that show mainly. So there's a couple of things that every actor we're going to go through, I'm going to mention. And the first thing is that the energy John Travolta's energy, okay, is off the charts. His charisma is off the chart. So, like you said, when he does stuff like that, I just think I get a kick out of it because he's so fun and he's giving these little ticks and these little performance, moments, right? And the other thing I will mention is that this movie, more than anything, this time watching it, and I'm not saying anything people don't already know, this movie's about kids putting up false fronts to keep from growing up, right? They need to put all these false fronts behind them. And we see that happen throughout the movie, them become more human and less putting on a show, putting on an identity, right? So they become themselves. And that's what you need in order to move on from high school and become human. So every actor seems to have a moment where that happens. And the moment I loved in here, there's a moment. So it's obviously the pink ladies find out, or Rizzo finds out that he knows Sandy because Sandy's been talking about this guy. And so there's the part where they're at the meet or whatever, and or the game. And then Rizzo brings Sandy to Danny, and there's a moment where he becomes human. His front drops. He's not cool Danny Zuko. He's the Danny that Sandy knew from the beach, right?
yeah, yeah,
And they have a moment, and then he realizes, oh, I can't look vulnerable in front of my dudes, right? And so he backs off, and that's exactly what gets Sandy mad at him. And the moment where she runs off and he's still trying to pull up a false front and he gives Rizzo a glare.
yep,
He knows exactly what she came over for. She looks back at him knowing exactly that she's just needled him and basically ruined everything for him.
yep,
That glare that he gives her, which is like daggers, I was like, wow, what a human, awesome moment. And yeah, he's goofy, right? Because there's a part, if I hadn't watched the movie, I would have watched the movie today. I would have completely forgotten about the scene where Danny tries to become a jock for Sandy, which is comedy gold. Everything that happens in that is so funny, especially the part where it's basketball and the guy throws in the basketball and he's like, you better watch it. It's full of that funny stuff. So there's the funny,
yeah,
goofy stuff. And I was telling my wife, like, when you're in a musical, you've got to be willing to be goofy. You've got to put your ego aside and you've got to look silly, look vulnerable, look cheesy, right? Travolta makes a sound in this movie, or a few sounds, but there's a main sound that he makes that's the stupidest sound I've ever heard an actor give, which is during Summer Lovin', and he goes, "Oh," which is this is the stupidest sound I've ever heard. But you know what? I love it. It is so funny and so, you know what I mean? It just sticks out, and that's his whole performance. It's so funny. It's so energetic when he dances. It reminded me of when you see him in Pulp Fiction and he's doing that dance scene with Mia, right, with Uma
Mhm.
Thurman, and how much we wanted to see him dance after he like disappeared from the limelight. And you can feel Travolta just step back into that limelight in Pulp Fiction. It has a lot to do with the dancing, but yeah, not just this, but Saturday Night Fever, but so much energy to this and so much humanity. And I want to keep bringing those things back. So we have the false fronts, but we also have these moments of humanity that kind of come through, and I love that.
Yeah. I wanna say too, like, I love the silly faces that he makes, like, during Grease Lightning. Like, when he
Mhm.
just makes these, like, silly Elvis faces and he's, like, really hamming it up, it's just so fun to watch. You're, like,
Uh-huh.
just I'm just giggling the whole time watching him make these funny faces and pull these, mug for the camera. It's like, "Oh, man." It's having so much fun, and so you're having fun with him, and that's what I like about it.
Yeah, I think Henry Winkler was originally cast and then he backed out. I don't, which I love Henry Winkler. We talked about him during our night shift episode, but I don't, like you said, the faces that Travolta makes, I don't know if any other actor would have made them as charming and
Yeah,
iconic. You know what I mean? So definitely a good
yeah.
choice of casting.
Well, Travolta, really good job.
Yeah.
Olivia Newton-John, what are your thoughts on her?
Olivia Newton-John is one of the great beauties in Xanadu, which is not a good movie. I know
Mhm.
it's an enjoyable movie, but whenever they cut to Olivia Newton-John in that movie, I'm like, this has to be the most beautiful woman on the planet, just the way that they're shooting her, right? And I think before this movie, it's funny because her career kind of had the same trajectory as this. Like she was known as like a goody goody girl, like she's playing Sandy, and then after when she becomes bad Sandy at the end, she changed that her image as well. I mean, I think it was like they had a sexier album that came out. I forget the name of it, but like she looked like her character from Greece. She looked like Bad Sandy. So she has that the innocence, and we'll talk about it in a little bit about how her defenses break down and what that means for girls that watch the movie, the message it sends them and everything. But I think that she's just again, she's got the energy. I think they're very good leads. I think she's got great chemistry with Travolta. I think they starred in a movie Perfect or something like I can't remember. They didn't make as big of a, probably getting that wrong. That was probably a Jamie Lee Curtis co-starring thing with Travolta, but they had such good chemistry, and you can see them in interviews later in life. And she just died like in 2022, just a couple
Mhm.
of years ago, of breast cancer. So it was just really sad. I think Travolta did I think he came out during the Oscars and did a retrospective on her and paid his respects to her. So that was very, especially after losing his other great love of his life, Kelly Preston,
Mhm.
to death. I think it was just, I don't know. I just think their chemistry is really, really good. What about you?
Well, I agree with that. Definitely, they do have chemistry. I will say this: she looks good on film. Like the camera likes her, and
Yeah.
so that's a plus for any actress.
Yeah.
When the camera likes you, then really you can kind of do whatever you want.
Yeah.
But she also is very realistic and very natural,
Yeah.
and she's got a great voice. And so when she sings and when she's singing and she's doing her thing, like you just can't help but just stay glued to the TV. You're like, wow,
Yeah.
she's got a lot of, charisma. She's really, really talented, really well
Right.
done. So Stockard Channing, you want to talk about her for a minute?
Yeah.
Rizzo?
Well, we talked about it before because I think at the end of the last episode, I talked about how it would be fun to talk about Greece like a bunch of 30-year-olds playing teenagers, right? But you looked up their ages, right?
Yeah.
What it just really quickly because I want and name Stockard Channing last if you can. But what were the ages of some of the major
Well,
actors in
I
here?
know Travolta was 23.
Okay.
Olivia Newton-John, she was 29, I
Okay.
think.
Okay.
I think Jeff Conaway was just turning 30, I think.
Hmm.
And then Stockard Channing was 33. So she
So
was
she
the
was the
oldest.
oldest.
Yeah, she was the
So
oldest.
when you said John Travolta was only 23, I think John Travolta's looks the same for about 20 years. Like it
Yeah.
didn't look like he aged at all. So
He's
I
like the
thought he
Paul
was,
Rudd of
yeah,
them.
yeah, I thought he was in his 30s. So when you said 23, I was like, oh, that's kind of young. That's only like what, 5 years away. Olivia Newton-John does have, like you said, she has that youthful energy to her. Stockard Channing looks the oldest. She sounds the oldest. It sounds like she's lived a life. She's lived more years than her character
Yeah, I
has.
never believed she was a teenager when I watched it.
Right.
There's no way she's 18.
But like with everybody, like I said, the Travolta's got the energy. Olivia Newton-John's got the energy. Stockard Channing has got energy up the wazoo. I know that we're going to talk about this later, hint hint, but like she did a screen test with Christopher Reeve for Superman as Lois Lane, and she's, when you watch that test footage, she's got such a powerful presence that Christopher Reeve ceases to exist when he's on that screen with her. So I
Interesting.
think they didn't cast, I think they didn't cast her because of that reason. Like she would have blown him up. I think Margot Kidder had more of an even kind of personality with Christopher Reeve, so they matched each other. But Stockard Channing has such a gravitas, and she's always had this, and such an energy that, like I said, she would have just made you not focus on Christopher Reeve, which I think they wanted to avoid. But
Yeah, I will
yeah,
say this too. I think actors who get to play Rizzo are just basically doing an imitation of Stockard Channing's,
yeah,
character that
so
she created.
iconic,
So
right?
she is Rizzo. So when you think the character Rizzo, people just try to mimic her and
Yeah,
do what she did.
she nails it. Like I didn't know Stockard Channing before I knew Rizzo, right? So she is Rizzo to me. Like I
Right.
got familiar with her later, and I missed it with Olivia Newton-John. Like she has that vulnerability where she realizes that she's got to, she can't be so innocent. Like she's got to kind of break down her defenses a little bit, which again we'll come back to. But what I loved in here is I think Rizzo lasts the longest without her facade breaking. Like she seems really tough. You find out slowly that she's pregnant, right, or whatever, and then when she has that, the song "There Are Worse Things I Could Do," that comes fairly late in the movie. That comes before the second act break. And so when she has that song, all of a sudden her defenses are down. We see her for who she is, right? Does she keep putting up a false front? Does she keep living up to the reputation that she has? Does she? So she's got, you know what I mean? It's like she's got a reputation that she can either live up to, or she can just break down and not have to follow. And it's just a powerful song. And I think she had to fight to keep that song in the movie, which I think was a very smart choice as an actor.
Yeah. Um, I was gonna say something, and okay, it was this. I thought it was funny this time around, noticing that all it takes to get Danny and Sandy back together is for Danny to trip over the hurdle. That's all it took for them to you know.
Uh-huh.
And then all it took for Rizzo and Kaneki to get together is to find out she's not pregnant. That's,
Yeah.
that's all it takes.
Yeah, all right. I do like too that it is as much fun as she makes of Sandy. The first connection that you see Rizzo have with anybody is with Sandy. Because well, no, there's the part with Kaneki where they're in the car, right? So
Yeah,
she's vulnerable. She tells him what his first name is, which is so funny. But
yeah,
like really vulnerable, and you don't expect it to happen with Sandy, but Sandy's so caring and she's just so empathetic that it does kind of break through. So when Rizzo says thank you, it's like you feel it. It's honest. She's not being sarcastic. She's not putting up a false front. She does recognize that there's goodness in Sandy. That there's, I don't know, there's goodness in her too. There's just a lot of humanity in Channing's performance.
yeah. I agree with that. And it doesn't really matter that she's 33. You still believe that she's Rizzo.
Yeah, you just buy. It doesn't matter after a certain
Yeah.
point. You're like, yeah, she's Rizzo. That's all that you
Yeah.
see, really. So
Well, I want to mention the T-Birds, Sunny, Duty, and Putsy.
okay.
Because even though these three are, super cartoony, I think they have a realism to them too, and they have a relatability. And when you have a group of friends, you have the silly friends, you have the ones that are kind of like the hangers on. You when you're in that kind of a friendship or whatever,
Mhm.
and you relate to that. And I just think that they're relatable. They're also really funny. Like they just do the Three Stooges bit they do, the dance and stuff they do. The stuff with the dance with the hand jive and the mooning and just all the stuff that they did. They're just I just love watching their scenes. When they're on screen, I love it. I'm just having a great time. And I was going to mention this too. The actor who played Sonny in the play that I was in,
Mhm.
uh, shout out to him, Aaron DeJesus. He actually is currently playing Frankie Valli in Jersey Boys
Okay.
on Broadway right now.
Wow.
So he's playing the character of the guy who sang the title track to Grease,
Yep.
and he
Yep.
was in Grease with me back in the day. So
Yeah.
pretty cool.
Well, I want to swing back around to Jeff Conaway, but since
Oh
you
yeah,
mentioned the T-Birds, I wanted the Pink Ladies are a lot of fun too, right?
yeah.
The thing with the T-Birds is when you watch Danny and Kinnicky, you can tell that they're putting up false fronts because they have moments where they're just very human with each other, right? Where they're
Yeah.
very loving towards each other, but they don't want to show that. The T-Birds are so dumb that they're just dumb that they're going to get there eventually, but they're all false fronts, right? Even though who's the kid? Is it Putsy that's dating Jan from
Let's
the
use the
Pink
blonde.
Ladies?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He's
Okay,
what you.
so even though they're getting along and they're vulnerable with each other, and there's a part where they show up to the dance and she's like, "Do you bring the concessions or whatever?" And he shows her the candy bars. They've got a bond, right?
Yeah,
So we get that they're just going with the flow. They're doing what they think is cool. I don't sense they have false fronts most of the time, even though I don't know if that makes sense. But the question that I had though, again, the Pink Ladies are Dee Khan, Jamie Donnelly, and Dinah Manoff, right? And they all have distinct personalities, which I think is great. They all kind of have character arcs, but it's fun watching them because as much as they talk about what it takes to be a pink lady, and as much as the T-Birds try to put up a false front, all I could think watching this time was, how did these girls get in this group? Because the stigmas that they seem to be presenting don't match who they are at all. Like the T-Birds are dorks,
yes.
right? The Pink Ladies are dorks. So it's how there's a vulnerability to all of them too, and I really like that. It's just a little bit of a smaller thing, but like you talked about Kaneki before, like swinging around to Jeff Conway. What did you? I mean, how is he
Well,
Kaneki to you?
let me say this. He's always my favorite character. When I was younger, I loved Kaneki. Like I was like, man, that's a cool guy. Like I wanted to be that guy.
Yeah,
And I always I was kind of mad when he had to, drop out of the race and let Zuko take over and drive
uh-huh.
for him.
Yeah,
But anyway, I think he did a great job. I think this too. I think Travolta and Conway did a really good job of establishing the fact that they have a history.
yeah,
Like, even if they are putting up this false front, they have a history. You know it. You feel it when they do kind of break down that wall and they kind of, have those moments. It's like, of course, because they're just so believable and you just believe it from the very
mhm.
start. And so I love that.
I wanted to see them hang out more, and the reason that for that is you mentioned before when Kaneki's like, "Are you still thinking about that chick?" And you can tell that Kaneki wants to. He's up for a heartwarming personal conversation. But Danny's up, oh, I got to keep, I'm cool. And so he's like, no, no, man. But you can tell that they have that. Later, when Kaneki asked him to be his second in command, right? They've got, like you said, they've got a history. You can tell Travolta and Conway, they really give that energy off of. They're really good friends. So they're really vulnerable with each other. I love that. And they're really open. And so when they do that thing where they hug and then they have to put on they comb their hair or whatever,
Yeah.
it's really funny because you can tell that they're just really good friends. They just don't, they have moments, but if it wasn't for the persona that they're trying to put on, they could be that way all the time. I just thought it was very charming and very, very fun to have in the movie. It's just very recognizable and warm.
Yeah. Is there anybody else you want to talk about acting wise?
Well, Eddie Deason, we obviously want to mention. Very
Okay.
popular, wow, that kind of thing. So it was funny having him in there. I like Frankie Avalon, is that his name? Um,
Frankie
because
Avalon, the
no,
singer
no,
of
no, Frankie Avalon, because he beauty school dropout,
yeah,
right? Like he shows up, and I think Frankie Valli was given the option of playing him or singing the title tune, and obviously he opted for the title tune. Um, Again, that song is a blast, because
yeah,
it's so aware of what's going on. Like it's aware of the false fronts. It's like no one will come to you unless you are a hooker, that kind of thing. Didi Khan is just really, like I said, she has that front where she wants to be a hairdresser. She drops out of high school, she goes back in, she's just very innocent, that kind of thing. So it's just everybody. We talk about the four main stars, Travolta and Newton John and Conway and Channing, but everybody's got that energy.
yeah,
Even what's her name, Eve Arden, who plays the principal, right, Principal McGee,
yeah,
during the hand jive song, and when they all do that huge choreographed number at the end, when she gets involved, when Arden gets involved in that and she's dancing along with it, that's when the energy of the movie is just off the charts. When I watched it today, I turned to Elizabeth and I said, this is just a movie that is hard to dislike. Like you
yeah,
watch it and it breaks down those defenses like we talked about. It just gets to you, whether it's moments, whether it's huge musical numbers, whether it's a performance choice, whether it's an actor's choice, what they do. It's something's going to get to you eventually, or a laugh, even a simple laugh, right?
yeah,
So I just think that I like to call this, because again, my wife was like, when I was laughing at a lot of stuff, she was like, I didn't know that you liked the movie that much. And I was like, this is a movie that I think is the epitome of you can love it, but it's also just as much fun to make fun of it.
yeah.
Right.
It's
Because
a guilty pleasure, I would
yeah,
say.
yeah. And it welcomes that. Like it's not afraid. It's not afraid to be what it is. And I think
Yeah.
that's just what's great about it.
And I will say this, whenever we did a performance and we did the number Beauty School Dropout, it brought down the house. We got standing ovations during that number every single show.
Yeah.
And so that definitely is a showstopper, that Beauty School Dropout number. But let me say this, you talked about hard to dislike. When I was younger, I really disliked the Beauty School Dropout scene. I don't know why. I just did not like I just didn't like it. I was just like I couldn't wait for that scene to be over whenever I was, when I watched it when I was a kid. I also didn't like the That's the Worst Thing I Could Do, the Rizzo song. I
Yeah.
remember not liking that song. And the other thing, what was it? I remember thinking I liked the Grease Lightning race scene. I remember thinking it was too long. That
Oh.
when I was young, even just being a kid, thinking this is going on too long. I remember thinking that back then. I like it now. I have no problem with that. In fact, I have no problem with any of it now. Like I love all those scenes now. But when I was a kid, I remember thinking like, either I didn't like it or I thought it was too long. But
Do you think that has to do with because it takes the attention off of the four, or at least with Beauty School
maybe
Dropout,
it
it
was
takes the
probably just
attention off of.
my young mind. I don't know.
Yeah, because
My
this time watching it, I thought it had a nice Busby Berkeley kind of setup and a style to it. The way that it's all kind of angled and it's just pure white, and it's got Channing and Manoff like a part of the group singing to her. I thought that was really funny. It's just I liked a lot of that. And again, it ties in with the whole theme of the movie. It's like, yeah, you think you're doing these things, but be innocent, like claim yourself, right? Be yourself. Don't try to be something you're not, right?
Yeah,
If you want pink hair, have pink hair. Like, don't try to hide from these things. So I think it ties in with that. And again, without that solo for Channing for Rizzo, the character would not land as strong. So I
I
think
agree. I
when you're
agree.
watching it as an adult, that's it. That's what gets to you, and like you said, you
I
like
want to say this too. I really liked Sid Caesar's part.
it.
I I don't know what it is. I love the coach. I also love Blanche. Whenever she's on screen, she cracks me up, man.
Yeah.
When he's like saying, "We're gonna rip them," and Tammy, she's like all doing that thing with her hand. She's like so funny. And
Yeah.
when she's like ringing a little xylophone bell thing during
Mhm.
the announcements, it's just hilarious, man.
I
Like
think,
everyone brings their A game. Yes, they're
yeah.
a little over top, a little cartoony, but they're so endearing and so fun to watch.
Well, it's a musical, so it's got a heightened
Yeah.
reality to it. So you're allowed to be goofy and over the top, right? I think Sid Caesar, what makes him so funny is he's not over the top. When it's the scene that I mentioned before, where it's Danny trying to become a jock, the way that the coach just reacts to him, he's amused by it. It's like, all right, well, there's obviously too much contact. Let's try this. There's
Yeah.
obviously too much contact with baseball. Let's try this. Like, let's try track. I think it's just very funny that he recognizes, I think, that Danny doesn't fit that lifestyle, but he can tell that he's trying something. And so he's the adult during those scenes. And I think since he's so quiet, it's what makes that so enjoyable in those
Yeah.
moments.
Well, let's talk about the songs. Which song is your favorite? Do you have a favorite?
Well, the Grease, I've got it on my phone. So the Frankie Valli theme song, I have that on there. I have a remix of the "You're the One That I Want." It's like a
Okay.
mashup with Snoop Dogg. That's really fun to
Really?
listen to.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, obviously, if you look at, I don't listen obsessively to There Are Worse Things I Could Do. I don't listen obsessively to Beauty School Dropout. I don't listen obsessively to anything that Shana Na sings during the dance sequence, even though that's fun. So I know that Grease I listen to. I know that Summer Lovin' I listen to. I know that You're the One That I Want I listen to. Obviously, We Go Together at the end. But I think, and it's weird what's making my favorite is Grease Lightning, I think might be my favorite,
Okay.
but absolutely not because of the lyrics. I think it's such a catchy, fun song. And I think kids kind of share this. I know my wife does. I know that her sisters do. I know that I did. You don't realize what they're singing.
I know.
It's so fun and it's so snappy and zippy that you don't understand the words that they're saying. I know that they released Grease in like a sing-along version where it was like follow the bouncing ball. What I wouldn't have given to be in that theater where it was a bunch of mothers and their daughters singing along to Grease Lightning and realizing
What they were
what
saying.
those words were meaning. I just think
Yeah.
it's so, and that's all of Grease. It's so fun that you don't notice that there's some really not PG stuff going on. I
Yeah.
don't know how it got that rating. I think when they re-released it, it got a PG-13 because it was
By the way, I was going to announce that it was only a PG movie, just so, but I
yeah.
forgot to say that.
Right.
This movie really should have been PG-13.
Yeah. So what about you? What's your? I mean, those ones that I mentioned that I listened to are all great. They've got such a great energy. But what's your
Yeah.
favorite?
Well, I agree. I mean, yeah, I agree. Summer Lovin' is one of my favorites. Grease Lightning, yes. We Go Together, and You're the One That I Want. I mean, all of those. I mean, I love singing them. I love, being in the play and having to do all the parts and do all the, I'm just taken back to where I was on stage and what I was doing and how I was. It was so much fun. And so, yeah, I mean, I love all of those songs.
Yeah.
My least favorite's probably Hopelessly Devoted. Oh, you know what? I do like the Sandy song, in the drive-in.
Uh-huh.
I like that one.
Okay.
In the play, that's not the same song. It's a
Right.
different song. It's something called I think it's called like, I don't know. I forgot. Something about the rain, something about being, I forgot what it's called.
Sure.
Um but anyway, there's a few different songs that aren't in the play that are in the movie. I want to say, uh what's the other one? There's one called, oh, Magic Changes. You hear it in the
Right. Right.
dance, but it was one of the songs that
Yeah.
Duty sings in the play. And then there's also one called uh Mooning. There's a song called Mooning
Right.
that one of the greasers sings. And
Hmm.
at the end of that song, he actually moons the audience in the play.
Okay.
And oh, this is always funny. Like in the drive-in scene, we had this like fake car on stage, or half of a car, and they were, getting ready to do the makeout stuff. He's like, "What? No one's watching," and the whole crowd is like right there watching this happen. So I
Hmm.
always got a really big laugh. So
Yeah.
it's always funny to hear me like, "What's the matter? No one's watching."
Right.
Anyway,
Okay.
yeah. So I love the music. I have really no problem with it. I love all of it.
Yeah, like I said, the soundtrack was the thing I got addicted to. So regardless of what everybody was singing or the words they were singing, what they were singing about, the subtext, like very catchy, fun stuff.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to mention?
Well, I love talking about this because there was this about how horny this movie is, right? We're barely scratching the surface, really. So there's a few things I wanted to mention. I studied screenwriting, and I had a screenwriting class in college, and one of the screenplays that we studied was Grease. So it was kind of an eye-opening thing. That's one of those things where the older you get, the more you realize what they're talking about. So when they teach screenwriting, they teach you like the arc. They have a protagonist, excuse me, and they have an antagonist, right? The protagonist is given a noble goal. Like this is just what almost every screenplay follows this. And throughout the movie, he tries to achieve that noble goal, but he's opposed almost at every turn by the antagonist. And then at the end, he's able to achieve his noble goal. Okay. So
Mhm.
if you're to apply that screenwriting technique to Grease, here's how it reads. Danny Zuko's noble goal is to have sex with Sandy. Who is opposing his goal? Who's keeping him from accomplishing his goal?
Sandy.
Sandy is the antagonist of Grease because she is keeping Danny from achieving his goal. I like that he keeps making headway, right? They have the scene where he trips over the what is the word I'm looking for? That where they bond. He trips over what he's jumping over during the track.
The hurdle.
The hurdle. Like he trips over that, right? So they bond. But then they have kind of a fight, and then there's another fight where they go to the dance together. Then because he's what's the girl's name that he's dancing with? Cha Cha. Like she obviously knows something else is going on. He loses her because he can't his false front. So his cool T-birdness keeps getting in the way of him getting with Sandy, right? And then at the end, and yeah, he does change. He does wear the sweater instead of his leather jacket at the end, right? So he's not James Dean at the end, but he breaks down Sandy's defenses so that she turns. I know they tried to do like a spin on like the rebel becomes the good guy, and instead they wanted the girl to become bad. So what I wrote down is it's funny. Goodbye Sandra D. I'm sure that was an anthem for many a girl for giving away her virginity. You know what I mean? Like you get to that point, you're like, yeah, I'm gonna give away my virginity to the guy. Like that's my arc in life, right? I just thought that was really funny. So at
Yeah.
the end, Danny wins because she like just becomes what he needs her to be. And then when they fly off in the car, that's literally a symbol for they're going to have sex. and they're ascending to heaven. So I just think that's really funny. But again, you can kind of say, oh, that's not really in there, but there are so many visual gags. So the three I wanted to mention during when they're at the sleepover, you have Dinah Manoff as Marty, right? When they're singing the commercial, the brushing the teeth commercial, she's doing this thing where she's got her arms up over her head and she's flexing her boobs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
She's watching
Yeah.
that. You have during Grease Lightning, which besides the lyrics, you have a part where Travolta takes the saran wrap and he rubs it on his crotch and he throws it. Apparently, it's a little bit more of a deep dive, but back in the 50s, kids, and even now maybe, kids thought that wrapping your junk in saran wrap was a good replacement for a condom.
Oh,
It's not. So they were using that kind of as a euphemism, right? Because that they're
okay.
kind of like that.
I wonder why he did that. It's like, why
Yeah,
is he doing?
yeah. I think they said I think Kleiser told him not to do that because they were trying to avoid an R rating, but Travolta did it anyway. And I think the censors or the MPA when they're watching, they're just so caught up that they don't notice anything either. I think that's the
Yeah.
only excuse why this got a PG instead of an R, right? And then so there's a bunch of other imagery stuff like that. But my favorite one, just like you mentioned during Sandy, and Travolta had to fight for it. He wanted a close up to end the song with his last note, but instead, you see in the background there's a shot of a wiener that jumps into buns.
Oh yeah.
You don't have to look far and you don't have to hear me explain much to understand what that's a metaphor for, right? So at the end of the song, when he's talking about his yearning to see a wiener, jump into buns, I thought that was just so funny, right?
Yeah.
But it's like it's one of those things. This movie's just permeated with that stuff, and you can find it
Oh
during
yeah.
Summer Lovin' when it's like we made out under the dock. What's Danny doing when he says that? He's not doing
Yeah.
a making out movement, right?
Yeah.
So there's just so much stuff. So that screenplay thing
Yeah.
about the noble goal being Danny trying to have sex and Sandy opposing and becoming the antagonist. Yeah, you can read that in the movie, but I just think that the visuals kind of push that. And I just think it's really amusing. I just think it's really funny. I think it's funny that people don't realize that's what's going on. And I think it's funny that when you grow up, you start, oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't when I was younger. I had no idea what they were talking about. But when I got a little older, I was like, "What?
Yeah.
What did you just say?"
And as a parent, you're okay with it because you know your kids aren't going to pick up on that stuff either, right? So you can show
Right.
them it's a safe space.
Yeah.
They
I
can
mean, I
just
think
handle
we even
whatever.
watched the movie with the kids, and they didn't really pick up on a lot of things that were being said. So we're kind of like looking at each other, like, "Are we okay?"
Yeah.
They're
Like your
not.
kid at no point turned to you and said, Mom, what does it mean to make chicks cream? None of that happened, I'm guessing,
I
right?
don't know.
Just over their heads. Yeah, just so
I think
great.
I think one of our kids said, "Why'd the hot dog jump into the bun?"
And you're like, well, in the old days at movies, they had those kind of ads. That's why it's in there.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
it just happened to end the song during that part. There's no reason. It's completely coincidental.
Yeah. Well, I did want to mention this too. Obviously, the choreography is something to be mentioned.
Yeah.
I think it's so well done, and we mentioned it already. How much fun they had with it. Um, but it takes a lot of work to choreograph something like that, something of that caliber, and with all the different working parts and the extras and the people and stuff. And by
Yeah.
the way, there's an extra that I cannot not look at when I'm watching the um, "We Go Together" song.
Mhm.
It's the guy in the green shirt with he has kind of like black hair, and it kind of comes to a point, and he's wearing a green shirt, and he does like a Groucho Marx impression with
Yeah.
the
Yep.
you can't not look at him when we're watching that scene, and he's just so engaging. My eyes follow him wherever he goes during that sequence. And
Mhm.
he's really good, really talented dancer. And then I realized when I watched it the third time, he shows up in the Summer Lovin' sequence. He's on the bleachers, and I was like, there he's again. And then he was in Born to Hand Jive.
Yep.
I think he's wearing like a blue shirt, and he was like one of the last few couples to still be dancing at the end there. And I
Mhm.
was like, there he's again. So it was just kind of fun. Now that I know he's in the movie more often, I'll probably or more than I thought, I'll probably look for him more often. But anyway,
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, I think Kleiser did an interview. I think he called them dancers 1 through 20. So if you look in the shot where they're on the Shake Shack, Danny and Sandra, and they come out and they sing, you're the one that I want.
he's in
They're
that too. He's in that
well,
scene.
if you look, all those students that are in front, kind of reaching, kind of progressing towards the camera, those are dancers 1 through 20, I think is
Okay.
what call it.
So
And
he is numbered then.
he gave each one of those actors, shows up in the movie at certain points previous to that in the movie. So they were all given their own backstory. They're all given their own arcs. Two of them, even when you see the part, I think it's when no, not Putsy, where Barry, is that the dark-haired T-Bird?
No, Sonny.
Okay, well, Sonny, when Michael Tucci or whatever, when he's got his neck up on the little stand and it's the dog with him, in the background and between them, you can see two actors kissing and making out.
No,
Those are
that is sorry, that's Duty.
okay, Duty. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Duty. So Barry Pearl is the one. Anyway, so when you see him with the dog, in between them in the background are two of those dancers who are making out, like heavily making out, and they've completed an arc right there. So again, Kleiser just gave these actors some business to do, so they would always have a character in mind. So they move a certain way and they behave a certain way. So again, just fun little details that you don't even really notice now. I mean, something has to be pointed out to you.
Yeah, but next time you watch Grease, you're gonna notice the guy in the green shirt. Trust me.
Yeah.
He's there. He's very recognizable.
Right.
Hard not to notice. So I want to briefly mention too, I think the cinematography needs to be mentioned too, because
right.
I mean, it's pretty straightforward, but there are some moments where it's like pretty iconic shots, like especially during some of the numbers, like Summer Lovin' and Grease Lightning. It's like some of the moments you just man, how'd they do that? It's like I don't know. So definitely cinematography needs to be mentioned.
Well, that's Bill Butler. He also did the cinematography for Jaws, which obviously I'm going to be very fond of, right? And you're right. Like, I think a lot of it has to do with eye lines. Like the dancers you're supposed to be watching, I swear to you, they're going to be actors that are kind of, their eye lines are pointing the viewer towards who they're supposed to be looking at. But it's also like you said, Summer Lovin', there's that shot where it's the split screen of Danny and of oh shoot, and Sandy, right? So it's that split shot of them. I like the shot again during the end of Grease Lightning where they're doing that point, and they're obviously in the fantasy version, and then it cuts with the same shot to back to reality when they decide, oh, let's get to work, guys, that kind of thing. So there's a bunch of again, eye lines and things like that. It's very cinematic, I guess you could say. And you don't, because you're caught up in the energy of it, maybe you don't notice those things. But if you pay attention, I think it's very cool to look at.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I want to mention this. It's okay, in the hand jive scene during the dance contest, Sonny takes Sandy away. And I don't really understand why Sonny has to come in and take Sandy away. Like I know for the story he ends up dancing with Cha-Cha in the end, but why is it gotta be Sonny to come take her away? Like, was that planned? I don't know. I don't know why Sonny's involved in that. I don't think that character really would be involved with something like that.
Yeah, how did he work something out with Cha-Cha before?
I don't know. I have no idea, but he just kind of shows up and just kind of whisks Sandy away, and she's like, "Sonny," and then he like pushes her out of the auditorium, and she leaves.
Yeah.
And then Danny's left dancing with Cha-Cha. That's always kind of bugged me. Like, why is Sonny getting involved in that? Plus, he's over there spiking the punch and getting drunk and getting ready to moon the camera. So what does he care? I don't understand.
Maybe it's just causing havoc. I know the main point is to get Sandy away from Danny, right? But you're right. It's like, why would it be him?
It
like,
could have been somebody else. It didn't be. I don't think it made sense to have it be Sonny.
Yeah, it's just interesting.
But is there anything else that like that you maybe have a problem with, or maybe you've questioned, or?
Well, the only, besides how do the T-Birds become T-Birds and the Pink Ladies become Pink Ladies, because they're dorky. Like, how did they, because they're perceived as being cool, but they're obviously dorks. How do they get into the club? My only other question, maybe anybody can, but you find out that Danny and Sandy are going to the same high school and they show up on the same day. And then is it that same day that Rizzo finds out that it's Danny that she's talking about? And then there's also, who's the girl, Wilcox, or is that her name? Who's the cheerleader?
Patty Simcox, yeah.
Patty Simcox. Okay, she comes over and she's talking during lunch. She's talking to Sandy about, why don't you try out for cheerleading, right? And then it cuts to their first football game, and Sandy's already a cheerleader, and that's when Danny's meets Sandy and everything. I'm confused about the timeline. How long did they go during the school year? Once the school year started, how long did they go before Sandy and Danny finally met?
Well, I believe that was like a homecoming game. So that was probably like the first, within the first month, most likely.
But Sandy would have had to try out for cheerleading.
Yeah, but that happens pretty early on in the school year.
Okay, so maybe a week or two, something like that. I just think it was funny. How did they keep them apart for so long? How did Rizzo control herself long enough? Was she just waiting?
Yeah, I can see that.
It was just a question that I had. Like, how long did they go?
Okay, one final thing I want to mention, and that is the way John Travolta says Sandy's name. Every time he sees her or he says, it's like Sandy, just like it just. And when I was younger, I hated it, but again, I like it now.
Mhm.
But it's just funny the way he says her name.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's vulnerable, like his voice cracks, so maybe
Yeah.
that's a acting choice. Well, the last thing I want to mention, just we do this often. Like since Grease is so iconic, early today, I just sent out a tweet on Twitter saying, does anybody want to share any memories of Grease? Right? Like, what was your first impressions? How long has it been in your life? Like, what things do you love about it? So I've just got a couple people that I want to read here.
Okay.
So I asked the question again. Tim Byrne on Twitter says Rizzo/Betty asking Kaniki to use her real name during sex is still one of the funniest damn things I've ever seen. It's funny because Kaniki doesn't know her name.
Yeah.
She has to tell him, and then he's like, Betty, he just goes overboard with it. Christopher Herman says, I'm not sure when I first saw Grease. I'm thinking maybe 1987 on HBO, but I am sure when I first heard Grease, and that was the summer of 1982, and I was staying at somebody's house, and they had a large record collection, and there were 3 albums I kept listening to. The soundtrack to Grease was one of them, the soundtrack to Star Wars, and Chariots of Fire were the other 2. So again, just kind of a meeting of the minds with the soundtrack there.
Yeah.
Natasha Alvar, who we had on for the Parent Trap, which is our most popular YouTube episode. She says, tell me about it, stud. Oh, how I wish I was slim enough to fit into those kind of leather pants. Which is funny because I think the story is Olivia Newton-John's zipper broke. So she couldn't take the pants off to go to the bathroom. So she tried not to drink water, and it was a really hot day, so she was just really uncomfortable. Our friends dissect that film. So we got Parker, Dan, and Angela over there. Anyway, Parker's the one that controls the podcast. Again, check them out. Dissect that film. But he says, Brett Parker, I just remember my mom watching this almost every week when I was a kid. I would catch myself singing the songs all the damn time. Ditto, Brett. All the time. We have Nicole from Defining Disney, a podcast, which I guessed it on there. They talked about Sleeping Beauty. We had a long conversation about that. She says, I was a teenager, and the whole time I was like, I was just watching and just blushing. I, to this day, hate that Sandy changed for him and not vice versa. Favorite quote, a hickey from Kaniki is like a Hallmark greeting card. Which a couple of things there is, number one, I think Conway actually insisted on giving Channing those hickeys, so they're real.
Oh, really? Oh,
And then the other thing too, I mean, I think that's funny because Sandy full on changes into, she basically sluts herself up, right? I mean, that's obviously what she's doing. I don't mean to be demeaning, but she becomes what Danny wants her to become. But how does Danny change? Do you think Danny changes, or is it just
I think he's trying. He was trying to change, and he makes a point at the end to say, "Hey, she means a lot to me, so I have to do what I need to do to get her." So,
yeah.
I would disagree with that. I think he does try to change for her.
Okay.
Obviously, her change is a little more drastic than his, but
That is
I
extreme.
think
Yeah, it's
he
more.
was trying to change for her as well.
Okay. And then our last comment is from Jeanette Mickenham, our friend, our good buddy, who was on, again, the night shift episode with us. She says, I was obsessed with Olivia Newton-John growing up and had seen Grease at least 50 times. Again, she's a theater gal, so she would know,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
She says, I wanted to be Sandy, but was more of a Rizzo. There are worse things I could do. So again, a lot of people that just have a connection to this movie, and I think that's, however you come to it, it's just like we mentioned, it's a movie that breaks down your defenses and you just like it. Like, there's no way around it, right? You just end up like it. There's a certain point of this movie where, yeah, okay, and you kind of give yourself over to it. I mean,
Yeah,
you agree with that, right?
I agree with that, 100%, 100%.
Okay. Okay.
All right, so I think that'll do it for Grease. So, what's next?
Well, we're hitting a milestone, Johnny. This is episode 99, and if the math works out, episode 100 is our next episode. So I was thinking, what can we do for a special, every podcast that hits 100 or whatever, that's a big deal, right? I mean, we hit 50. I think we did Back to the Future for number 50. What could we possibly do for 100? And I know I've always said from the outset that we wouldn't cover this movie because everybody and her mother, or actually everybody and his dad has talked about this movie, which is Star Wars. But again, I didn't want to cover Star Wars, right? So kind of to tie in with our 70s with 90s Palooza, I did want to cover the special editions of Star Wars. Maybe a longer episode, maybe a shorter episode. I don't know how that conversation is going to go, but I do want to talk about because we've mentioned it many times, special effects over the years and what those kind of things mean to us. So let's talk about the Star Wars special editions that were released in 1997. Let's talk about the differences. Let's talk about what it means to change your memories and change your nostalgia. I just think that would be a fun kind of off kilter, offbeat kind of way of doing something that I never said that I do, but that everybody would eventually
Well,
come around to.
I think it's appropriate. It's a good movie for number 100. So
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So we'll be talking about not just Star Wars, but Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, and what they did to those movies that got so controversial.
okay, that sounds good. All right, well then for NostalgiaCast, I'm Johnny Craddock,
And I'm Darin Lundberg.
and I don't like tea.
Oh, well, a lot babaloo bop, a lot bamboo.
I don't like parents.
I have nothing. I've got nothing.
Okay.